Good evening again, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a final video to you today on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know, and that is reasonability. Reasonability, what is reasonable? Because sometimes you hear this term, and it's an officially recognized term. It's a technical and formal term, sometimes used by the courts beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes that should ring a bell. Reasonable, and it's also an objectable term, or objectionable is the word I'm looking for, term by some people, to some people, because it involves opinion, it involves preference and perspective, right? It involves perhaps some kind of judgment by an individual, and people aren't always going to agree on what's reasonable. But the point of this video is that there's a pretty easy way to come to an agreement about what is reasonable, and to use a bit of measurability to decide in a practical sense what should be reasonable in a given case. So the operative words here are a given case, and that involves a context, right? So you're going to need a context. You're going to need some kind of situation or hypothetical scenario where you can analyze it, and this can even be, automated. It doesn't have to be super complicated. So you can create what's called a rule of thumb or a guideline, but not necessarily a hard unilateral rule for everybody. The other operative word is what did I say? Reasonable. Okay. Agreement is the other word. Agreement. Now, this is the crux of it, really. You don't have to necessarily discover the absolute best reasonable criteria for a given question or problem. You don't have to necessarily get to the best case scenario. All you really need to do to settle it is form an agreement. This is the part that I think people are having a real hard time with in general, is dealing with things that are perhaps subject to interpretation and involve preference or opinions, but which could be really easily resolved by a simple agreement. This is where agreements come in. When things aren't necessarily concrete or measurable, when they're not super objective or obvious, you can solve this very easily by just simply taking a stab at an agreement. Just say, well, this seems to be reasonable. These parties are involved. They're affected by this situation or this problem directly. And we can very easily communicate with these people, usually. I mean, at what point can you not communicate with people who are involved directly? It wouldn't make sense otherwise. But then you just simply get everybody's consensus. And if people can't agree, if you have a lot of people, for example, such as in a democratic environment or country or jurisdiction, that's, democracy does serve a purpose. I don't want to digress into an analysis of the democratic process, but democracy is just a large-scale agreement, right? It's people deciding that the majority have agreed that this is the case, or should be the case, or will be the case moving forward. So reasonable can be subject to interpretation. But that doesn't make it irrelevant. It doesn't make it unuseful. It just means that you have to work with people sometimes. And this is a huge challenge in a lot of ways. Diplomacy is distasteful to a lot of people because it involves an effort, right, to communicate with, to understand, and to trust people, in addition to forming agreements, right? In addition to that. And you'll find that at any point where somebody is required to trust somebody else, there's a segment of the population that just falls apart. They don't want to do it. They refuse to do it. And they are so pathologically against trying to trust people, or even putting themselves in a position where they would have to, that they delegate the process to symbols, documents, policies, rules, laws, and anything to avoid an agreement. And it's sad because sometimes there are situations where the only solution, such as when something is not measurable, is to agree on it, to find some kind of agreement when something has to be decided to be reasonable or not. which is most things, unfortunately. So feel free to reach out with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com. Have a great night. Thank you.